Witchwood. Part 1, The Discovery. The village of Elderby wasn't on any of the maps Maren used. She found it by accident, if you believe in accidents. She was a folklore graduate student, researching obscure rural cults and pagan remnants for her thesis. After weeks combing through regional records in the Northumberland archives, a half-burnt parish log caught her attention. Witchwood, it read. No date. Just a single entry, 3 girls found dancing naked in the fields, marked with symbols. Priest declared them unsavable. Sent to Elderby. There was no record of an Elderby in the surrounding area. The librarian said she'd never heard of it. But after long hours poring over land deeds and cemetery rosters, Maren found a hint, a dotted trail, unnamed, curving deep into the woods past Allenmouth. It ended in nothing. She followed it anyway. The trees closed around her car like they were growing faster the further she drove. The GPS died 10 miles in. Then the signal. No texts. No bars. Just the endless forest, old and thick and wet with fog. At last, the road narrowed to a single muddy track. And then, rooftops. Elderby. It was a village held in stasis, maybe 5 or 6 cottages, all grey stone and mossy thatch. Ivy grew like veins over every surface. Maren parked by a cracked stone well and got out. No welcome signs. No people. Just silence, broken by the wind and the distant creak of trees. She knocked on the largest house she saw. Eventually, an old woman answered, wrapped in wool and smelling faintly of smoke. You're not supposed to be here, the woman said flatly. Maren introduced herself, offered a polite lie about researching local history. The woman's expression didn't soften. They don't like visitors, she said, but stepped aside anyway. Her name was Greta. She was over 80, maybe 90, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. She served Maren tea by the fire and sat stiffly, watching her like she might disappear. Maren mentioned the burned church record, the girls, the symbols. Greta didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, they never left. That night, Maren stayed in an abandoned cottage Greta offered, for one night only. It smelled of damp earth and dry herbs. She lit a candle and found a small journal tucked behind the hearthstone, handwritten, bound in faded leather. The first page simply read, "We are the daughters of root and bone, and the forest does not forget." Each entry was stranger than the last. Descriptions of midnight dances, of girls painting symbols on their bellies with animal blood. Of voices from the trees. Of her, Mother Wirm, they called her. Not a woman, not a god, but something ancient that lived beneath the roots. They made offerings to her. Teeth. Hair. One even cut off a finger and buried it under the yew tree in the glen. And then, the entries stopped. Mid-sentence. Maren barely slept. The wind howled through the trees all night, and sometimes, it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like breathing. Or whispering. At dawn, she walked to the forest edge. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, maybe the glen. Maybe the yew tree. The woods felt alive. Not in the poetic way, in the predatory way. She found the tree eventually. Thick. Twisted. Carved into its bark were symbols, circles, eyes, crescent moons turned inward. Something stirred in the branches above. Something heavy. Watching. She backed away slowly. As she turned to leave, her foot struck something soft. She looked down. A small doll lay at the base of the tree, handmade, stuffed with straw, bound in red thread. Its face was stitched crudely with black twine, and its mouth had been sewn shut. The same symbols were carved into its chest. Maren picked it up, without thinking, and the wind died instantly. The silence was so sudden it throbbed in her ears. Then came the voice. Low. Soft. Inside her head. You've opened the door. Part 2, the awakening. Maren didn't remember walking back from the forest. She only realized she was home when the front door of the cottage creaked shut behind her. The doll was still in her hand. Her knuckles were white from gripping it. She dropped it onto the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. It stared back. The silence in the house felt too complete. Not peaceful, waiting. She tried to shake the fog from her mind. Had she really heard a voice? Felt a presence? It must have been her imagination. She was sleep-deprived, steeped in folklore, vulnerable to suggestion. That's what she told herself. Until the mirror shattered. It was sudden, a loud crack from the bedroom. Maren ran in and found her small hand mirror lying on the floor in pieces. She hadn't touched it in days. But there it was, cracked into 7 sharp fragments. In each shard, her reflection looked wrong. Her eyes too dark. Her mouth just slightly smiling. She swept up the glass, her hands trembling. That night, she tried to read more from the leather journal, but the ink had changed. It had bled outward, like veins branching into the pages. Words had transformed into twisting shapes. A single sentence remained legible: the forest marked you. The dreams began that night. She was standing in the clearing again, under a sky that pulsed red. Girls in white dresses danced around her, barefoot, their skin pale and veined like marble. Their eyes were pitch black. Blood dripped from their mouths as they smiled. Behind them, it emerged. A shape that wasn't a shape. All roots and limbs and flowing moss. Eyes grown from bark. Fingers like branches, trailing bone charms and bits of fur. Its voice wasn't sound, it was a pull, like gravity dragging her thoughts down into the dirt. "Give me your hands," it said, reaching. She woke screaming. The next morning, Greta stood on her doorstep. "I told you one night," the old woman said. "You should have left." Maren demanded answers. Greta looked at her for a long time, and something in her sternness softened. "There are places the world has tried to forget," she said. "This village is one. Witchwood runs under Elderby, deeper than roots. The first settlers brought their own gods, but the forest already had one. Mother Wyrm." Greta flinched at the name. They used to say she was the hunger between things. The voice behind the silence. She grants what's asked, for a cost. The girls, those 3, they bound themselves to her. She doesn't let go. Why haven't you left? Greta shook her head. Some of us are born here. Some can't leave. Maren planned to go. She packed her things, left the journal and the doll on the table. But when she stepped into her car, the battery was dead. She hadn't left the lights on. Her phone was still at 3%, even though she'd left it charging all night. And the trees, they looked different. Closer. Thicker. Like they'd grown while she slept. That night, she lit a fire and tried to stay awake. The wind outside had a voice now, rasping words just beyond understanding. She began to hear footsteps on the roof. Then above the ceiling. Then inside the walls. She hid in the corner with a knife, but nothing came. Until the laughing started. High, girlish, echoing in the chimney flue. She screamed, dropped the knife. The fire sputtered out. When morning finally came, there was a fresh page in the journal. New ink. New handwriting. The roots have tasted you. We remember your name. You belong to us now. Beneath the writing was a crude drawing, Maren. Standing at the yew tree. Her eyes were hollow pits, her chest carved with symbols. The doll was hanging from her hand. The last line of the page simply read, "Offer or be offered." In the woods that evening, she heard children singing. A melody she didn't know but somehow remembered. A lullaby she'd never learned. Round and round the yew we go, root to root and bone to bone. She followed the sound. Back to the glen. The yew tree had changed. Its bark was split open, like a wound. Inside, barely visible, was something writhing. Something alive. On the ground, at the base of the tree, was a second doll. This one had her face. Same hair. Same clothes. Its eyes had been gouged out. And at its feet, a small silver charm she recognized instantly. Her mother's ring, the one she'd buried with her 10 years ago. Maren ran, but the forest didn't let her out. She looped the same path 3 times, ending at the same twisted tree. And each time, the doll had changed. The third time, its mouth was open. Thread cut. And a voice whispered from inside the hollow yew, "We are awake." Part 3, The Covenant. The forest wouldn't let her sleep. Every time Maren closed her eyes, she saw the yew tree opening like a mouth. Heard the old song in voices that didn't belong to the living. And always, that second doll, with her face, changing more each night. By the 5th day, her reflection in the mirror didn't look quite right. Not wrong enough to be certain. Just, off. Eyes a shade too dark. Hair that twitched when there was no wind. A smile that lasted a second too long. She tried to escape again. Took Greta's bike. Made it 10 miles down the forest road before the tires burst simultaneously, like something had sunk invisible nails into the rubber. When she walked back, the cottage windows were open. She had locked them. Inside, on the table, the doll. Sitting upright. Its mouth had been sewn shut again. This time, with Maren's own hair, she confronted Greta the next morning. "I didn't touch your doll," the old woman said, not looking up from her mortar and pestle. "It has my hair." "You picked it up," Greta said flatly. That was the choice. Maren wanted to scream. There was no choice. "There always is," Greta said, still grinding something dark and sticky. "You took it. You marked yourself. That's invitation." "To what?" Greta paused. Then, with a grim breath, "The covenant." She sat Maren down. Explained in words heavy as stones. Before Elderby, before the village, before any maps, the land was ruled by something old. Something that whispered in the bones of the earth. The first people worshipped her, not with prayers, but with offerings. "She gives," Greta said. "But she takes more." Centuries ago, 3 sisters bound themselves to her. Not by mistake, willingly. They were outcasts. Healers. Women no one wanted. But the forest wanted them. They called themselves the Wyrm's daughters. "They don't die," Greta said. "Not like we do. The forest keeps them." Their presence had never left Elderby. They moved through the roots. Through the wind. Sometimes they were people. Sometimes they use dreams. But once you hear their song, once you answer it, they know you. And they don't forget. Later that night, Maren awoke to the smell of earth. Damp soil. Rotting leaves. She turned over, and the floor was covered in roots. Black, wet tendrils slithering up the bedposts, around her legs, coiling near her throat. She screamed and stumbled from the bed. They withdrew instantly, vanishing beneath the floorboards like smoke. The candle beside her bed flickered. On the wall, in the melted wax, was a shape, an eye, surrounded by branching veins. Watching her. She didn't sleep again. On the 6th day, she returned to the yew. Not out of bravery, but exhaustion. "I don't know what you want," she said aloud. The woods answered with a sudden, stifling silence. Then a voice, thick as tar, from inside her own skull, "We want you." The tree cracked open like splitting ribs. The hollow glowed. Inside was not light, but faces. Girls. Dozens. Pale, open-mouthed, hair floating like drowned spirits. Eyes black, empty, wide. Some smiled. Some screamed. All watched her. Then 3 stepped forward. The daughters. One with hair like fire. One with a face half rotted, stitched with moss. One with no mouth at all, just a slit beneath her nose, leaking black sap. The mouthless one held out a hand. Share in the root. Share in the rot. We kept the gift. Come and take it. Maren fell to her knees. She didn't remember walking back. That night, she found another journal entry. But it wasn't in the old book. It was in her own handwriting, on fresh parchment, placed beneath her pillow. I tasted the root. And I understand. The covenant isn't forced. It's inherited. Blood remembers. Maren's hands trembled. She turned the page. A diagram. Circles. Sigils. A ritual. Tonight. Greta didn't stop her. You've already been chosen, the old woman said. You can run from it, but it won't run from you. Maren returned to the U. The clearing was full. Women. Dozens of them, naked, painted in earth and ash. Their eyes shone black in the moonlight. Some looked ancient. Others looked just like her. She stepped forward, heart pounding. One of the daughters came to her, the rotted one. She pressed a single finger to Maren's chest. Her touch burned like ice. You want to know. You want to see. You want to belong. Then came the chanting. From blood to bark, from bone to seed, let root consume what root shall feed. The ground opened. Maren screamed. But it wasn't terror. It was understanding. Something entered her, through her skin, her breath, her memory. A hunger, ancient and patient, curling around her spine. Her mouth filled with soil. Her veins pulsed with cold sap. She could see the forest from below, feel the worms, the bones, the deep things curled in sleep beneath the stone. She saw her mother. And her mother before her. All of them marked. All of them WIRM fed. When she awoke, she was alone. Face down in the glen. The U was closed. But her body wasn't the same. Her fingertips were stained black. Her heartbeat was slower. Her breath tasted of moss. And on her chest, beneath her shirt, was a new scar, a symbol carved directly into her skin. A spiral. One root curling into another. Part 4, The Descent. Maren stopped feeling human sometime around the 10th day. She looked in the mirror, but her eyes no longer reflected light the same way. Her pupils were larger. Hungrier. Like they were pulling things in. She didn't sleep. Not really. She'd lay in bed and listen, to the forest. It spoke now. It pulsed beneath the floorboards and sang through the windows. Sometimes it whispered her name. Other times, it used her mother's voice. Maren, come home. You were born with roots in your lungs. Greta no longer answered the door. The old woman had locked herself inside her stone house, and when Maren walked by, she saw dozens of dried dolls hanging from her rafters, each one weeping sap. Maren tried to leave again. She had to. She took the old parish road on foot, past the well, past the edge of the map, walking until the sun began to fall. But the forest didn't let her go. The path twisted. Trees shifted. Every landmark folded back in on itself. When she finally burst into a clearing, lungs on fire. She was back. The yew tree stood before her, still split. Still open. Only now, it pulsed like it was breathing. And the doll was gone. That night, she bled roots. Thin, white tendrils pushed from her fingernails while she slept. She woke up screaming, tangled in her sheets, her fingers dripping sap and something that looked like milk. They receded by morning, but the marks remained. And the scar on her chest. It had grown. The spiral now had branches. On the 12th day, the daughters returned. Not in dreams. Not as illusions. They came through the floorboards, rising like mist. Silent, watching her from the corners of her vision. Whenever she looked directly, they vanished, but the air where they stood always stank of earth and bone. They began leaving things for her. Bundles of teeth. Thorn-wrapped charms. Bones carved with tiny symbols. And once, a jar of liquid so black it drank the candlelight. No matter how far she threw them into the woods, they'd reappear by her bed in the morning. By the 13th day, she started hearing the tree inside herself. Not metaphorically. Literally. When she closed her eyes, she could hear bark cracking. Sap moving. Branches shifting in a wind that didn't exist. The you had entered her. She knew its name now. Mother Wyrm. Not a goddess. Not a demon. Something older. A hunger in the dirt. A consciousness without form. Something that remembered every root ever buried, every prayer whispered into soil, every child sacrificed beneath moonlight. And she'd chosen Maren. Greta broke her silence on the 14th day. She burst into Maren's cottage uninvited, holding a knife that looked carved from petrified wood. "You've been fed," she spat. "She won't stop now." "Why me?" Maren whispered. Greta hesitated. Her mouth trembled. "Because you're her blood. Your grandmother was one of them. Your mother ran before she could be initiated. Thought she escaped. But the Wyrm never forgets its own." She pressed the blade into Maren's hand. "You want out?" Greta said. "There's one way." The ritual required 3 things. 1. A token of your bloodline. Maren wore her mother's ring. 2. A piece of the Wyrm's body, the sap. Still in the jar. 3. A willing sacrifice, something from you. Not metaphor. Meat. Bone. Maren didn't flinch. She cut off the tip of her index finger and buried it beneath the yew at dusk. The forest screamed. Not wind. Not birds. The forest. The trees twisted. Bark cracked open to reveal eyes. The roots surged upward like snakes, writhing, clawing at her legs. She poured the sap onto the ground. The screaming stopped. And then, the Wyrm rose. It didn't have a shape. Not a body, not truly. Just movement, darkness, the smell of grave dirt and birth. It towered without height. A presence that filled space without occupying it. All around her, the daughters knelt. "You are chosen," they whispered in unison. "She waits in your marrow." Maren raised the blade. But her arms wouldn't move. She looked down, and saw the roots coiling up her skin again, this time sinking into her veins. Her blood ran clear. Her lungs filled with cold. The scar on her chest opened, and inside it, something glowed, green, pulsing like a bud about to bloom. The Wyrm whispered. "You are mine now. Be still and grow." She awoke in the cottage. Naked. Cold. Mouth full of soil. The blade lay beside her, snapped in 2. On the floorboards, written in dirt, a message: "It's too late to run. You are the root." Part 5, The Reckoning. Maren didn't remember eating, yet she never felt hungry. She didn't remember sleeping, but she began to dream with her eyes open. The scar on her chest was no longer a scar, it had opened, petal-like. Within it pulsed a new organ. It throbbed when she was near the forest. It sang when she touched the earth. The Wyrm had become part of her. And something in her liked it. Greta had vanished. Her cottage stood empty, windows shattered, herbs shriveled on the hooks. Inside, the floor was covered in scratch marks, claw marks, and the walls bore symbols Maren didn't recognize. One thing remained, a note scrawled in blood on the hearthstone. She takes what she loves. She leaves nothing behind. Maren stood at the doorway for a long time, the wind at her back, whispering secrets only the trees understood. Then she turned to the woods. She had made her choice. She walked barefoot to the glen. The forest bowed as she passed. Branches parted. Leaves quivered. Small animals emerged from their burrows, eyes glowing, watching her without fear. The daughters awaited her. They stood in a perfect ring, clothed in white, skin painted in mud, blood, and ash. Their mouths moved silently, chanting words the earth remembered. The yew tree towered above them, fully bloomed now, its bark slick and pulsing, its hollow yawning like an open wound. From within came the WIRM's voice. "Daughter." Maren stepped forward. Her skin buzzed. Her vision pulsed with green. The root remembers its branch. The seed remembers the tree. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her blood answered. Suddenly, Greta's voice rang out behind her. Weak, but defiant. "Don't." Maren turned. Greta stood at the edge of the glen, bloody, her eyes sunken and wild. "You think you're becoming something powerful," she spat. "But you're not. You're just a vessel. A hollow body for something that wants to wear you like a mask." Maren blinked. For the first time in days, doubt cracked through the spell. The daughters hissed. Roots surged from the soil, wrapping around Greta's legs. She held something in her hand. A flame. Old fire magic. Passed down from the before times. It danced unnaturally, refusing to go out in the wind. "If you step into that tree," she growled, "you don't come out. Not as you." Maren stood frozen. Behind her, the forest. Her inheritance. The WIRM, offering eternal memory. Before her, the last woman who remembered the world before the covenant. Greta's eyes locked onto hers. "Remember your mother," she said. That broke something. Maren stepped back. The daughters shrieked. The forest howled. The yew tree split wider, its roots lashing, trying to pull her back. Faces spilled from its hollow, her mother, her grandmother, her own reflection screaming in pain. But Maren ran. To Greta. To the flame. She grabbed it and hurled it into the yew's mouth. The WIRM screamed. A sound like centuries breaking. The daughters fell to their knees, howling as fire raced through the roots, climbing up bark, turning old growth into ash and light. The glen exploded in green flame. When it was over, only two stood. Maren, smoke rising from her skin. And Greta, barely breathing. The yew was gone. The daughters, gone. The scar on Maren's chest had closed. Not healed, sealed. She was no longer a vessel. But she wasn't fully human, either. Greta died that night. Her last words, "The forest sleeps now. But not forever. Burn the seed, or plant it. That choice is yours." Maren buried her by the well. And then she walked to the edge of the forest. It let her pass. 6 months later, in a city apartment miles away, Maren still dreams of the woods. Sometimes she hears them whisper when her windows are open. Sometimes, when she touches houseplants, they lean toward her. And in the mirror, sometimes, just sometimes, her reflection moves when she doesn't. She keeps the jar of sap locked in a box beneath her bed. But she can feel it, pulsing. Waiting. The WIRM is gone. But the root remains. And someday, someone else will hear the song. And the forest will wake again.